Welcome! You are listening to the CRM Success Show, where you will hear from CRM executives who have overseen some of the most interesting and complex CRM implementations. Your hosts, David Masri and Kira Whitey, will be bringing you real stories, real insight. Follow along on social media for updates on new episode releases, exclusive content, and much more. Enjoy the show, and thanks for listening.
Welcome to the CRM Success Show, where we deep dive into CRM success and failure, delivering real stories with real impact. I'm Dave Masri.
And I'm Kira Whitey.
And today we're talking with Dave Swidan, the Director of Salesforce Engineering at Veracyte. So welcome, Dave.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Good to have you as well. So Dave, why don't you start off by giving our listeners a bit of a high-level 35,000 feet overview of your time in the Salesforce ecosystem, a bit about yourself.
Sure. So my name is Dave Swidan. I am the Senior Director of Engineering at Salesforce Engineering at Veracyte. I've been in IT for just about 30 years. I started in a manufacturing company in sales ops, or sorry, not sales ops, but supply chain and operations. And I got my first stint in IT doing an SAP implementation. Back in 95, actually, and fast forward to about 2008, after quite a few SAP implementations at companies I worked for, I joined Seagate to try to get away from SAP and learn something new, and I happened to join the Salesforce team at the time, and so it was in 2008 that I actually got my feet wet in Salesforce, and at the time, you couldn't do half the stuff you can do today. It was still S controls. There was no Apex and Visualforce that you could do. And so that was kind of my first experience with Salesforce. And from there, made it a career to work in Salesforce environments up until I went back to Seagate in 2022, I think, to do another SAP implementation at Seagate, oddly enough, and then made a quick pivot over to Veracyte, where I'm at, where I'm leading the Salesforce team.
Awesome. One question I want to cast your mind back a little bit through the years. How did you go from doing a bachelor's in marine biology and falling into technology? Now that's interesting.
Yeah, I get that question a lot. So I actually, like I said, when I was about 18 years old, I joined a turnkey manufacturing company in the Bay Area, and so that I could put myself through school and not actually have student loans. And I worked there for about 10 years. So, and I put myself through school, and to get a degree, I just really wanted to get a degree in something I really enjoyed. I loved the ocean. I was interested in biology, and it was just a good fit. And by the time I graduated in 94, and I realized after I graduated, because I had worked for Logistics was the company throughout that time, I realized that I already had a career. I was in my mid-20s, and shoot, I had a career. Like, what am I going to do with marine biology? So I did some volunteer work after, and I actually almost pivoted and got my master's in environmental science, but I started talking to a counselor actually at San Jose State, in fact, and they go, "You really have a career. Are you sure you want to do this? And I mean, you would really take a step back." And I was like, So I kind of stayed in the high tech world, and here I am. But I don't regret at all getting a degree in marine biology. I mean, there's a lot of knowledge and a lot of skills that I actually got out of that. Even to take into the high tech world. I mean, just because you have a degree that may not fit, in an IT environment, doesn't mean it didn't teach you how to think critically and analytically, and sort of use those skills to build a career. So,
awesome. So a big part of your career was spent with Seagate, and we're going to talk a little bit more about both ERP and Salesforce shortly, but I think we'll talk about Seagate and Veracyte and maybe Outset Medical. Just very quickly, tell us what those three different companies do, so that our listeners have got some context for later on.
Seagate's a hard drive manufacturing company, right? So they, it's either WD or Seagate today, and if you have a hard drive, it's one of those two. Outset Medical is it's a med tech company, and they have a dialysis machine that they've designed and built over the years. I think I started before they IPO'd, and then I went through that with them. And it's actually built to be somewhat mobile. It's built for home as well as clinics. And then Veracyte is a diagnostic company that focuses on genetics for cancer treatment.
Okay, good stuff. So Seagate, prior to Seagate, your first stint at Seagate in 2008, you've done a successful SAP implementation prior to that, correct?
Yeah. Actually, quite a few. I mean, I did one at Logistics back in '95, and then I went to 3Com, and we implemented SAP through a series of phases, and then we quickly pivoted and re-implemented it to get rid of customizations that were built over the years. And then I went to Apple, which SAP was already pretty well established, and again, finally ended up at Seagate SAP. I wasn't even working in ERP at Seagate when I went there. It was all Salesforce. But I think where they saw the benefit in me joining was my background in understanding big enterprise systems and my ability to help build integrations. And at the time that I joined Seagate, Salesforce was literally, I don't know, maybe 6 months into being owned by the technology team. It was brought in by sales and marketing. Sales marketing realized they can only do so much with it. And again, this is back in 2008 when you couldn't do quite a bit on Salesforce like you can today. And so the technology team inherited it, and sales had a big appetite. They were pretty much the primary stakeholder. And so they wanted people that could come in and sort of think out of the box, think different, and start to help build solutions on Salesforce.
Mm-hmm. So back in 2008, there wasn't online material like there is today, right? In terms of advice and guidance on Trailhead, and not as many companies had obviously implemented Salesforce back then. So what was that like? All of a sudden learning a new, a CRM you never maybe even heard of before at that point. How did you go about that in 2008?
I love technology, so that's one thing that has always been. I like new things and I like to learn new things. So when I got the opportunity to do something outside of SAP, learning a new system like Salesforce wasn't difficult. In fact, I found it somewhat refreshing and easy, because even back then, how you manage objects and creating fields and all the basic things that we still do today. I think I was like, wow, this is kind of a game changer. This is a pretty easy platform to scale. And yeah, there weren't the resources. In fact, they had a team. I wasn't the only team on the Salesforce team. At the time, there were another, 3 or 4 people. And for the most part, it was just being used for your typical CRM stuff, opportunities. Sales didn't really manage leads that much. They didn't like to. Account management, things like that. But the first class I went to, I think maybe 2 weeks into it, was I actually went up to Salesforce, and I think it was a week or 2 in class learning to be an admin. So that's how I got to be an admin. There wasn't any online sort of options at the time that I remember. We actually just had to go pay for an admin. I don't know if admin 201, maybe that was the course, I can't remember, but I think it was a week or 2 of just like literally 8 hours in class for that period of time. And I came out of it and I was like, oh, complete game changer for me. I'm like, my eyes are open, I'm ready to go.
Nice.
So
good.
So you actually took the exam then, the 201 exam, right after that, coming out of the class?
Yeah. And the concept of certificate, like I was certified, I had the, I have a little certificate somewhere still probably. But we didn't talk a lot about certifications at that time. I mean, we didn't have the ability to go to Trailhead and do free training. In fact, it's funny, I just mentored a guy I surf with quite often. He's a younger kid. He graduated from college like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. He's probably in his mid-20s, wants to make a change. And he and I just talked about it. I was like, if you want to do something different and you want to get more into the technology role, start taking trailheads, learn Salesforce. And sure enough, like a week later, the guy's like going out there and he's trying to get certified in a bunch of sales. So I guess the point is, there's a lot of things that we have today that we didn't have in the past that people can take advantage of, and Salesforce provides it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of learning resources, but the product is also huge. Like, it's absolutely huge.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if it's bigger than SAP now. That's probably an exaggeration. So, though back in 2008, right? You were working on SAP. They had SAP.
Mm-hmm.
Was there an SAP CRM? Like, wouldn't that be the obvious choice? And any reason they decided to go to Salesforce, like this brand new company?
Seagate wasn't on SAP at the time. They were on Oracle. So when I went back to Seagate in 2022, we moved to SAP. So in fact, the reason I went back there is I have a certain skill set in that SAP world. There was a challenge in that project. They needed my skill, and they brought me over to fix an issue, to get that thing over the finish line, right? So, and it's around master data, because I have a strong master data background, especially around parts and bombs. In fact, back in the days, they used to call me the parts and bombs guy at 3Com. But anyway, I think Siebel, a lot of companies had Siebel. That was kind of a CRM back in those days. And it was, there's always a lot of complaints about that. SAP does have a CRM component, but I mean, let's be honest, all your ERP environments, right? And they're really good about the planning, the purchasing, the manufacturing aspects, the financials, all that stuff is why you have an ERP environment, right? Typically, I haven't seen sort of modules within SAP. They do have CRM capabilities, but most companies won't implement that. They will keep the focus on your financials, your planning, your manufacturing, the core skills or the core functionality that an ERP environment does support. And usually they will have a different platform to manage their CRM, which is more focused on sales and marketing, and then in some cases service, right? So, I don't think I've been at a company yet where the entire stack is in one enterprise platform.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever either. Actually, you do think quite a few were on NetSuite, where they're using NetSuite CRM. And you see a lot of migrations off NetSuite CRM, and then they splitting.
Yeah.
But that one is fairly common, I think. Though, I mean, I worked in ERP for a few years before going into the CRM space. So for a lot of our listeners, they're more hardcore CRM people.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of touched on it, right? When you think ERP, you're generally thinking financial, accounting, maybe supply chain stuff. But like, why don't you give our listeners like the core difference between CRM and ERP, and then maybe specifically in terms of architecture between SAP and Salesforce?
I mean, to me, they're very different platforms, obviously. And I am sort of an ERP, I am a Salesforce proponent. Love the system. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today if I didn't, and believe in it. But ERP to me is from a enterprise platform. It's the heartbeat of the company, for sure. Like, you don't implement Salesforce to go address your core functions to build a product, ship a product, and roll up your financials. Salesforce, that's not a Salesforce thing. That is an ERP thing, whether it's Oracle or NetSuite or QAD or SAP. It doesn't really matter. Your ERP environment is what drives that company from a systems perspective. CRM, Salesforce specifically, again, I don't think there's a better system out there that lets you scale. I don't think there's a better system out there that doesn't have give companies the ability, just from an implementation perspective, to pretty much get an instance. You've got the built-in security model. You've got out-of-box data models that pretty much from the start, you could start managing leads, opportunities, accounts, and easily scale it. And the other piece to it is CRM and ERP there's got to be an integration. You can't, like, your customer onboarding process typically, for example, will start in your CRM and end in your ERP, right? Because ERP is always going to be, if you think about pure ERP and what it does for a company, your customer master is not, Salesforce is not the single source of truth of the customer master, typically when you've got these kinds of enterprise architectures. ERP is your final state for customers. Salesforce is good about the onboarding process, and there's got to be tight integrations. But that's the difference. I mean, the difference really is your ERP is the heartbeat of the company. It's where you're going to close your books at the end of the day. And Salesforce, when it comes to things like driving approvals, onboarding customers, even taking in orders to feed them to an ERP environment, having the ability to have an external portal for order intake and giving your partners and your customers the ability to see data that they need to see even within your ERP system. Salesforce, I don't think there's a better solution because you're not going to give your external partners and your customers access to an ERP environment, but you can use Salesforce to facilitate what they need to see in terms of the transactions and other areas that they need to be aware of to drive decisions on their side.
Yeah, because it goes back to the customer service, right? It's not just end of sale. It used to be, right?
Yeah.
Pre-sale, right? Marketing, sales, close the sale, goes to the ERP, do your billing, your financials. But now you have the customer service. You have to service them, and that's in CRM.
Mm-hmm.
So you end up with a much tighter integration than you might have to. But it's true that the ERP generally maintains the core customer master information. Though what I was really getting about when talking about the differences, a little bit on the architecture, because like I said, our listeners are very familiar with Salesforce architecture, but not necessarily SAP. I don't know SAP at all. Like I said, I assume they have a cloud product now, but I have no idea. It's not all on-prem. I assume back in the 2000s, you were working on on-prem systems. You were dealing with servers and scale and maybe load balancers, direct database access, right? So there's some, I guess, really architectural differences that give you a different level of not necessarily better, but a different mode of attack to solving problems. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yes, I'm not an ops guy, so I don't want to butcher data centers and servers and hardware and stuff like that. But the reality is, I mean, I think there is a cloud product for SAP now, but I don't think you'll see many companies implement it. I think it's all pretty much still on-prem. In fact, when I went back, I hadn't touched SAP for, I don't know, 13 years when I went back to Seagate to do that implementation. And I still had a local GUI on my machine to drive transactions and see data and things like the same one that I worked with back in '95. It didn't change that much. Now they do have a web client now. That was kind of new. And they do have, I want to say it's called Fiori now, the ability to sort of build sort of more of a web tiled app, like, kind of like you might see in a Salesforce portal or something like that. But at the end of the day, when I went back and I logged on to SAP for the first time, it was very much like 1995. And that's not to knock them because, in fact, when I went to look at a material and look at a BOM, the screens were exactly the same and the transaction codes were the same, which is actually kind of a good thing because if, you can, it's sustained that same sort of architecture and functionality over a long period of time. But it is still pretty much on-prem. I don't think, I heard there are some smaller companies that can implement a cloud version, but I'm not sure how big it is in terms of your ability to scale and in terms of volume. So, it is an on-prem still. So architecturally, it's not a cloud product. Now, I think probably NetSuite is, QAD is sort of a smaller ERP system that I've worked with in the past. Again, doing a lot of what other ERPs do. They have a cloud product, but I don't think you would ever see an Apple or a Seagate or a Cisco or anybody like that implementing something like that to drive their business.
Even a new implementation.
No, I highly doubt it. I mean, if you think about all the big six, the big companies out there, right? The big high tech companies, especially, they're either running Oracle or SAP. pretty much guarantee that in terms of their primary enterprise platform for ERP.
Mm-hmm.
Mid-sized, smaller companies are likely running NetSuite. There's probably a lot of, I think Q8E is used in a lot of med tech companies, but you're not going to see a scenario where, at least today, an Apple's going to go, hey, we're going to re-implement SAP and it's going to be a cloud version, because I just don't think they have the ability to scale it the same way they do with on-prem. So you do have to deal with data centers and servers and all that kind of stuff.
Would they move their infrastructure to like a cloud infrastructure? Like
you can. I mean,
service, I guess. So you're running your servers as virtual servers in Azure or AWS, and
yes, they can. I'll give you a funny story. So back in probably the 2000 time, from early 2000s, when I was at 3Com, we had our own data center, right? We had an entire like floor, and we moved. One of the things I was tasked with was, hey, we want to move our data center. At the time, I think the company was called EDS, right? So they were basically a data center as a service to some extent. And it's funny, I think about that, and we did. We moved all the hardware. They were going to support it, and it was a big undertaking, and SAP was included in that. And the funny thing about it was, I look at that as like the kind of a pivot point when the cloud kind of concept started coming out, because now we don't have hardware. We're just managing our sort of applications, and someone else is worried about all the other performance and load balancing and that kind of thing. Obviously, you pay for that, but yeah, I mean, you can certainly have all your enterprise stuff hosted by a cloud, but it's sitting on servers in a data center somewhere. You might not have to manage it yourself, so you might not have to have all the ops. But I think in the case of Seagate, I think they did manage. I think we still had a big data center.
Yeah, it's expensive. Infrastructure services
Mm-hmm.
is expensive, and you really got to watch the burn of that. It's one of my pet peeves, honestly. Even today, it's like I got to control when the machine powers on, when the machine powers off. How many CPU cycles am I paying for? Leftover, right? Or like always on. Anyhow, that's a topic of this. So what about some other differences? Let's talk about like implementation. Like when you're planning SAP gets a bad rap, right? Let's not beat around the bush. It gets a bad rap as something that's really difficult to implement, prone to failure, costs $4 million and takes 3 years, right? I mean, obviously I'm exaggerating a bit. I don't know if to the small SAP implementation, never heard of one, but maybe there is. So is there, well, let's start with, there any truth to that? And are things done differently than in the Salesforce world, where it tends to be a little bit more, at least the reputation is, right, to be more agile? And
yeah, I lost you guys for a sec, but yeah, I think I got all your questions. So let me start with the myth. SAP does get a bad rap, but we can't blame the systems, right? You got to blame sort of the implementation and the approach to the implementation. The system's not the problem typically. So that's one thing. The second thing is, I've never been on a bad implementation. So, I don't know if, I haven't done hundreds, but I've done quite a few big ones at large companies. And I'll tell you, like the first one I did, we implemented SAP in 4.5 months. Now we did it not with a big IT team. In fact, I wasn't even in IT at the time. I was pulled from the business because I pretty much helped write all the ISO 9000. I knew how everything worked at that company. I'd been there for so long, and so did the person next to me, who was a finance person, and the person behind me, who was kind of on the sales and distribution side, and then one other person on the purchasing side. They picked 4 people from the business, and they partnered us with a premier consultant that taught us how to implement the system, basically. And we did it in 4.5 months. And at the time, we're talking in the 90s, smaller company, not, it was a private company, but it was a pretty complex implementation. And we went live. Our target was 4 months. We extended it by a half month, and I think, I don't remember the exact cost, but I think it was like $4 million. And there was a formula to that success, which I can lead into. At 3Com, I went over there to help with their SAP implementation. We went through multiple regional phases. That took years. That was like a 3-year project. And I don't know the cost. I was, it was probably, lower than my pay grade at that time to understand that or know that. But the reality was, over those 3 years, we had successful implementations. We got everybody, on the system. And I think that was another man to SAP implementation. Man-man's kind of, those of us that are, maybe at my age know about man, which is the old ERP of the past. About 6 months after we went live with the last one, we ended up going, there's just too much customization and the products, have changed and we just need to re-implement it. And then we re-implemented it successfully, somewhat painfully, in 6 months, full global big bang. And then, fast forward to me rejoining Seagate to do an SAP implementation. I think I joined, I want to say 1.5 years into it. And it was about another 1.5 years to implement. And I will tell you, probably one of the most successful things I've been part of. Amazing team, 0 consultants, no big sixes, right? And we literally turned the lights on July 4th and went live, and very few bumps in the road. And there's a formula to all of this. And it doesn't matter if it's an ERP system or a CRM system, right? So we can talk about that formula. I mean, I have some thoughts. I could share that. But that's kind of my experience on the SAP side. Did I cover all your questions so far?
Well, except how it's different than Salesforce. But you seem to be saying that it's the same in terms of process. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's the same. Like, I don't think, any implementation you do, it doesn't really matter what system it is. It's not the system that's going to fail. It's the approach you take to implement that system. So for example, everywhere I've ever gone, when people bring up problems to me and say, oh, the system's broken, or we need to implement this and we're struggling or whatever, my first question is let's not worry about the technology, let's talk about the process, right? We know the system can support the process, even the out-of-box functionality, right? Typically that's, you pick a product based on what it can do for you. But it's really the business process that's going to drive how you implement that system. It's also the business process that's going to tell us, do we need to really customize, or can we think different? Can we change our processes to align to a more best practice that the system helps us get to, right? So you start at the process layer and you actually start to talk about what is it, what do we do today and how do we do it? You put boxes and arrows together and you have those deeper conversations. But to have those conversations, you got to make sure that if you're kind of, you're on a journey here to implement something new. Again, doesn't matter if it's Salesforce or SAP or Oracle or whatever. You got to have the right people in place. Like, you can hire a big six or or a big five or whatever, or a boutique even to come in and help you do it. But at the end of the day, it's the internal people that are going to help you drive that success. And you can't involve everybody, but you got to have transformers and super users that can actually help start answering those business process questions and documenting things. And as you're doing that, as you're working with those people that have all that knowledge of how things are done at that company, whatever it is, you can actually start to proof of concept things in those technologies that you've selected and show them how it works out of box, and then start to pivot and start to find the it depends and start to sort of adjust as needed, right? Everybody goes into a project typically, doesn't matter what type of technology we're talking about. A lot of people go in, we need to go out of box and vanilla, right? But until you start to dive into those processes, you don't know if you can go out of box or vanilla, or if it's, vanilla with a few sprinkles. So those are some of the keys to success, I would say. And then the other thing is, where I've seen like things go well and things fail is, especially with bigger implementations, getting stakeholder alignment up front, especially at the steerco level, is critical. If you don't do that, there's going to be a lot of challenges, both from a change management perspective, as well as setting the expectations that any implementation you do, Salesforce, ERP, doesn't matter. It requires a lot of business partnership. Like IT can't do it alone, because at the end of the day, it's not IT that's going to be the end user of the system. So setting the expectations with the right folks in all the different functional groups is very important. And some of those expectations is, it could be, you're going to have to spend 30% of your time in a given month working through requirements, documenting things, organizing user acceptance tests, all that kind of stuff. Like, these are all sort of formulas that I've seen succeed when you've got all that lined up front. And where things start to fail is, when you're not controlling your scope and you don't have the right business folks and the functional groups can't align and people really don't understand and you haven't started to document those business processes. That's where things start to go haywire. And to be honest, again, it's not the system that's the problem. It's the process, and it's the project approach and the program approach that you take.
Yeah, I think you kind of hinted at it. It's not just the people, but it's the team, right? How well they work together. I think,
Yeah,
a team of, let's say, mediocre people will probably outperform that works well together. Will probably outperform a team of superstars that, for whatever reason, can't work well together.
yeah. It's funny when, again, I'll use SAP as, or Seagate's implementation as a good example. A lot of the people that I had success with implementing back in, the 90s and 2000s, in terms of where I was then, when I went back to Seagate, and I think I left for only like 2.5 years. Pretty much everybody that I had worked with to do a successful implementation there was who I worked with at 3Com back in the days. I mean, it was like a full-on reunion. And these are all people that were part of the same success stories that I was part of. And just so happened that the CIO at Seagate at the time was someone that I worked with at 3Com. And that same person, those folks that were there, had followed him through sort of a lot of his journey and been part of other successful implementations. So I guess the point is, like, on the IT side, if you have a lot of trust and faith in the people that can do the right thing, because you've seen them do it time and time again, you'll see those people at companies later on doing the same things that they did in the past. And that formula that I talk about, it's no different today. Everything I talked about is how we implemented it at logistics. Everything I talked about is how we drove success at 3Com. So yeah, I mean, it's the people on both sides too. It's IT, right? It's, if you have partners, IT has to work with those partners, and those partners, if there's a true partnership and alignment, and they've got the right skill sets to help you get over the hurdles you have, that's important. But I would argue that aligning with the business, both at all levels, they are the ones that ultimately are who have the go, no-go decision. They're the ones that actually have to do all the user acceptance testing. They're the end users. And if you don't have them involved early, and you don't set the expectations of the amount of work it's going to take to do it, whatever the implementation is up front, things are going to go haywire towards the end. That's typically where you start to see, oh my gosh, we don't have resources. Oh my gosh, we're in a critical month or critical quarter, and there's too much volume and we can't support this. And those are the kinds of things that start to go awry. And then on top of that, if you're not establishing what the business processes are up front, right? If you didn't document them well, you didn't have good conversations up front, what you're going to find is halfway through, people are going to go, oh, we forgot about this, right? And it's a big thing. So now we've got to add scope, right? And so these are all the things and that happens in every project. It's how you control them that I think is, how you drive that success. So change management, scope creep, these are all things that, again, parallels. Like, there's no difference. It doesn't matter what system you're talking about. You're going to have those challenges in every system implementation. It doesn't matter what platform.
I definitely concur to that thought process. I was fortunate enough to recruit in Europe, and being based obviously from the UK. SAP is huge in Europe, right? Germany,
Yep.
Holland, in particular, manufacturing, supply chain, logistics, pharmaceutical, those types of industries. It's a go-to for those. And one of the biggest reasons we heard for project failure was actually countries where the companies are so huge, right? As you'd expect with an SAP ERP implementation, but each country would want SAP to work in a different way, and there'd be so many nuances between languages, currencies, ways of working, cultures. That would often, coming back to change management, most of them would fail because Germany would want it built out differently to how the Dutch would want it built out, and they would want it completely different to how America wanted it to be built out. And that was surprisingly one of the biggest reasons we would constantly hear about why an SAP project failed. Is that anything?
Yeah,
Is that something you've seen? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly like, I'll take again the 3Com scenario, right? What's funny is some of the folks in my first implementation, they're out in Luton, and I spent an entire month at Go Live in St. Albans. So I've actually done the the Magic Roundabout in Hemel, right? The crazy one. I don't know if you know that, but
I know it.
It's a little hard to navigate in a car.
Yeah.
But yeah,
especially on the wrong side of the road as well.
Yes, yeah. But anyway, I digress. But the reality was that was part of the challenge, right? We had a regionally sort of, it was a global company at the time. 3Com's not even a company anymore, but that's a different story. Yeah, I mean, we were focused on EMEA, and then we put the focus on the Americas because that's where we did a lot of manufacturing. And then we had an Israel component. So, we did a very regional rollout. But you're right. I mean, when you open it that way, there were a lot of it depends, right? Where how EMEA wanted to drive things was different, and even in that EMEA rollout, we had multiple plants, right? We had sites in Ireland, we had sites in the UK. How they did things with very similar processes and needs in between Ireland and the UK was very different, right? And so what we ended up with in the end, like when everything was said and done, we had a lot of customization, a lot of it depends type scenarios, and that's why there was a decision at some point to go, let's bag everything we just did and re-implement and do it in a more standard way. Which, by the way, it was more vanilla with maybe a little bit more sprinkles on top. So, but yeah, you're right. I mean, global implementations definitely add to those challenges for sure.
So we know SAP is global. And I think most people listening will know or have heard of SAP, but in preparation for this episode, I was doing some fact finding on SAP. Won't surprise you to probably know it's the number one ERP vendor out there. But I'll ask you both this question. What percentage of global transactions from a revenue standpoint across the world do you think touch an SAP system?
That's an interesting, I wouldn't even know.
Hazard a guess.
Hazard a guess, like a percentage of global transactions? I don't know.
Yeah.
Let's see. Let me think about this really quick because I know companies that aren't SAP. I don't know. I'm gonna. Maybe this is even low, but I'll say 85%.
85%.
If I'm gonna answer this, I'm gonna go higher. Only because of the wording of your question. You're not asking the final transaction was an SAP. You're asking touched an SAP, which means raw materials, right? The components somewhere. It's probably closer to 95%.
It's actually 77%, which I thought was still a lot. So three quarters of the revenue in this world, touches an SAP system at some point. 99 of the 100 top 100 largest companies in the world use SAP in some context. It has over 460,000 customers across 140 countries, 31 billion revenue. What I thought was interesting, because we touched on the cloud piece. So of the 460,000 customers, 23,000 of those customers are using their new cloud product. So obviously it's, I mean, quick math, that's less than 5%, about 5%, right? So only 5% of its customers are using their cloud product, but I suspect over the next few years that might increase, right?
I would
Well,
imagine.
this
I mean,
is
I'd
a CRM
imagine,
podcast, Hero. You
yeah,
have
I
the
know
same
we're talking.
stats for Salesforce?
Yeah.
We'll come back to Salesforce then. So a couple of quick questions, just initial kind of 30 seconds thoughts. How would you compare Salesforce and SAP? I'll ask you a couple of quick questions or topics. Firstly, from a customization approach, how would you compare Salesforce to SAP?
Way easier. It's still not that easy to customize SAP. I'd say by design, right? For the most part. But I would also argue that your ability to scale and customize on Salesforce can be your best friend and sometimes a company's worst enemy, really, because of what you can do and how quick you can do it.
Probably an obvious one, but what about implementation speed?
For sure, implementing Salesforce is going to be a lot faster. And I would say you have a lot less risk to deal with. Not saying there's not risk, not saying there's not complexities, but if I think about most SAP or most Salesforce implementations, they're going to be, focused more on the CRM and service side than anything. So you don't touch every functional group, and so your user base is probably even less. Even at a large company that has a large large number of users, there's going to be fewer users probably that are touching your CRM than your ERP.
Okay. What about from a user adoption or kind of UI differences that when you've gone live, what are the kind of users experiencing in terms of like ability to then maybe a power user to understand the platform? Obviously, we know Salesforce has its drag and drop type approach, but how would you compare the user adoption UI differences between the two?
I think the general user experience on Salesforce is far easier for users to understand and adapt to than even SAP. I mean, but like I said, I mean, SAP, like when I logged on for the first time in 13 years, it was pretty much the same screen I saw, even further back. So, but the user experience on an ERP environment, especially the older school ones that even I'll be honest, even on the web front end, I didn't find it as rich of an experience as I find when I log into a Salesforce environment.
What about upgrades and general maintenance? Now, obviously, Salesforce has 3 upgrades a year, but I don't know if SAP does, or is it more of a manual upgrade? How does that compare?
Upgrades are a project, sometimes a program in SAP. Yeah, it's not. It's a lot more challenging, a lot more risk. Getting those. I rarely worry about a seasonal update from Salesforce affecting me.
But you would SAP potentially.
It's not automatic, so the worry there is that you've actually got to you got to put a team around it, and you got to do some testing. It's it's a bigger program.
Do you skip versions?
It's not an implementation, but it's pretty sizable. Whereas things happen automatically in Salesforce, and yeah, sometimes you gotta make sure that if you build some customizations, you got to make sure you plan for them, but it's completely different scale.
Mm-hmm. Maz, I think you were going to ask a question on that.
Yeah, I was asking you ever just skip versions.
You can skip. You can still be on a down rev version of SAP and run your business. There are certain cases I think in the past that I've seen they start to not support you, but it was rare. So you can absolutely skip versions and upgrade SAP later.
What about last one for the comparison piece for now? But what about like general out of the box capabilities? How do you find Salesforce have more of that? Does SAP?
No, I mean, you can, the out-of-box functionality in SAP exists. I mean, you do have to configure things and set up, and it's actually very similar. You know, you've got to set up, like if you're talking about Material Master, for example, you have to set up your material groups and your basic stuff, and right. But out of box, you could pretty much jump into the system with minimal configuration and start creating records and transactions for the most part. You know, similar to, you know, in the other unique thing is typically with ERP environments, you know, I'll talk SAP more. You actually do have to set up your financial org structure, your sales, your plant. Like you have an org structure you have to set up. You can't do anything until you do that. If I were to get an environment today, a brand spanking new Salesforce environment, and I spun it up, you know, I can start creating accounts, right? I can put an account, it's got the address. I mean, so it's, you know, out of box functionality in both systems is there. I would say Salesforce pretty much your ability to go fast is probably higher.
Awesome. So coming forwards to the present, you're with Veracyte. What are you doing, I guess, from a Salesforce standpoint for them? Again, sharing what you can, as some of it is perhaps ongoing as we speak. But how are they using Salesforce? What are your plans looking forward to the future, the next 6-12 months? What are your goals and aspirations and projects during your time there?
Yeah, it's a core platform for sure. It's definitely core and enterprise to us. You know, it's used for ordering and other things. So Veracyte, you know, acquired a company, Decipher, I don't know, 3 years ago. Obviously, they have their own systems. Part of that stack's Salesforce, and so you know, part of, you know, I'm trying to do a few things. One thing I'm trying to sort of modernize and simplify, and also consolidate. So that's kind of what's on my plate. You know, obviously, when you inherit systems, and you try to merge systems and processes, there are challenges in that, and that's kind of what my focus is trying to get us to a point where, you know, we're modernizing and simplifying, really.
What are you most looking forward to about Salesforce going into 2025? Maybe it's Agentforce, maybe it's AI, but anything else that's kind of capturing your attention?
Yeah, you know, like I said, I haven't even looked into Agentforce. I've had a lot of other things to focus on even on the Salesforce side. I am interested in it. You know, we are a healthcare company, so AI is a little scary. You know, we've got a lot more compliance type things with, you know, PHI and things like that we have to worry about. So, you know, what am I excited about Salesforce, you know, in the future? I guess one thing I learned, which was interesting, is there's potentially some 2025, I heard, is going to have some connectors that potentially give you the ability to connect to systems like NetSuite without having to go through a middleware. I think that's pretty exciting if that's really on that roadmap and something we're going to get. Doesn't change things for me that much today, but I think that's a good opportunity. I mean, if you can simplify your architectural stack and, you know, almost build point-to-point solutions between, or integrations between systems without having to have middleware, that's kind of interesting to me, right? I mean, you know, typically you've got a MuleSoft or a Boomi or a Tibco or whatever in the middle of all that. So that's cool. That's exciting. I've been fired up on Flow since it came out. Like, I feel like they're going to continue to provide functionality just with Flow. And if I'm being honest, it's a game changer. And if you're a developer today, you know, I think a lot of developers fear a declarative, you know, the clicks before code functionality sometimes. But the reality is, I think to build good, complex solutions, even in a declarative model, you actually have to understand development. And so I think that you know, I'm guessing, but I feel like it's a pretty good guess. Flow is going to continue to change, and it's going to continue to evolve, and for the better. And that better is being able to allow people to scale much faster to build solutions. like that's what I'm excited about.
Matt, so obviously your background's heavy focus on data and integrations and so on. Have you heard anything around that as well? What Dave mentioned?
So Data Cloud, I believe, does have a NetSuite connector. I know CRMA had one for quite some time to bring data in. I have not heard about pushing data back out to NetSuite. I know, obviously, natively it does it. Data Cloud does, with sync out to not sync out, zero copy, right back out to Snowflake. But I've not heard about a native outbound integration to NetSuite. That's something you actually heard of, or you was
Yeah,
just
I
talking
heard
about
it the other
inbound?
day. No, it was a true two-way integration is what I gathered, but it could have been bad information. But I was like all fired up all of a sudden, like, well, this would be awesome. Like if we can actually do that, yeah.
Save a lot of
Yeah,
time, a lot of resource cost, and so on, I'd imagine.
well, I
Sure,
mean, the devil's
sure.
obviously in details, right? Because there's a lot of tools on the market now that do it pretty straightforward. The question is the mapping and then transformations and
Right.
all of that stuff, right? Because you have to create an order going the other way,
Yeah.
right? Consuming data.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's an interesting place for, I think, Salesforce to go. I'm not surprised that a product like that would come on the market. It was just surprising that it would be native. So I know we'll see. We'll see what it looks like.
Hey,
Let's see.
it's funny. If I like, I've developed on Boomi, so usually when you're building your process on a Boomi platform, you're consuming the model here, consuming the model there. You're building your process, and then you're mapping data, right? So,
Right.
I can kind of like I'm speculating here, but theoretically, like if I think about building a flow in Salesforce, if there's a connection that you could build with a external environment, an ERP, whatever it is, right? A lot of what I would do in Boomi, I don't know why I couldn't do it in Flow if that capability existed, right? So I don't know. I was very excited about it. I don't know if it could be a rumor, and hopefully I didn't spread a rumor, but the reality is, if it's true, yeah, I think it's, again, another game changer. And again, I think it probably would have a component to Flow.
So safe harbor.
Safe
Fingers
harbor.
crossed.
Yeah. Where's my little like safe harbor,
In a year's time, if it doesn't happen, we'll edit it out and repost the episode to
Yeah,
protect
there you go.
ourselves. I just
Yeah.
want to finish up on Dreamforce. So I thought one thing that was really interesting was you were one of the first that I know early. I don't know a lot of people, but early kind of speakers at Dreamforce. I believe it was 2008, which was when you were invited by Salesforce to talk at Dreamforce for the first time, right?
I think it was 2008 or 2009. Yeah, it was early days. Yeah, I want to say it was either. I based my Dreamforce on the concert. So my first one was Foo Fighters. Awesome, by the way. And then the second one, I think it was the Stevie Wonder one, which might have been 2009. I can't remember now, but yeah, I mean it was at least 2009. I don't think it was 2008.
Okay. Foo Fighters did perform more recently, so just for people who
They
know,
did, yeah.
I think yeah, they were there. I managed to see them there. I would also agree with your assessment there. So you got good taste. But have you been back to Dreamforce since? Like, how if so, how has that compared to like when you went? And are you going to go, I guess, in 2025?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I haven't been to Dreamforce since the last time I went was Green Day. It's again concert, right? Which was it was either Green Day or Foo Fighters, or not Foo Fighters, but Red Hot Chili Peppers in San Francisco. It was the year before you had to. It was so big that they had to actually start bringing in cruise ships. So whatever year that
Yeah,
was, I don't remember. That was
2018,
the
I
last
think.
time Yeah. He might have been even before that actually. But that was the last time I went. Part of it was it got overwhelming. It got too big, and honestly, we just had a lot going on at the time, so it just didn't make sense. And I was like, give my ticket to someone else. And speaking at Dreamforce, by then it was a little. I mean, it was probably one of the best and most rewarding experiences because I made a lot of good connections, and I felt like I had a lot of good content to share. I think I did 3, 4, 5 sessions maybe in the span of 3 years. I think it was something to that effect. Some bigger, some smaller, some panel. I did one with a couple Facebook guys. But yeah, I mean, it's a lot of prep, and it's a lot of, when I was going to Dreamforce to do those events, my ability to do a lot of sessions was limited because you were, obviously nervous. You're going to go speak in front of potentially hundreds of people, and you got to prepare, and then there's questions. So yeah, I mean, like I said, it's rewarding. I'm glad they asked me to do it and go, and I feel like people came up to me and had a lot of good feedback and asked a lot of good questions, and I think I enlightened them in some cases. But yeah, I mean, do I plan on going back to Dreamforce? Yeah, my account team at Salesforce really wants me to, but to some extent, I think I'd rather have people from my team go and then report back. But yeah, I mean, it's just a lot, and I've got a lot on my plate already. So Dreamforce this year, I may just send someone else. We'll see.
I think it's a good incentive for someone on the team, right? You could always put like a vote system for the rest of the business who influenced who was the biggest help when it came to the Salesforce team, or something like best performer, because I think it is an experience that everyone should experience. There's nothing like it, right? And I can see how for an admin or a developer, an architect even, it is a big deal, and it's cool to tick it off and experience the Ohana in all its glory. So I think that's a good idea. And I'm not on commission for ticket sales. I'm just saying it from my own experience. But awesome. Okay. Well, I guess any other events that you're interested in this year outside of Salesforce? Any other conferences that are on your list, or anything local to you that networking wise?
No, I mean, like I said, I've got a lot going on. My team's got a lot going on. So, I would say 2026, hopefully things start to settle down, and, maybe I'll be at Dreamforce. Maybe I'll go this year. I don't know. But no, I mean, there's not a lot of conferences that I'm interested in going to right now. Every day I feel like I'm heads down and solving good problems. So
good. All right. Well, Dave, we really appreciate you taking the time with us today to share more about SAP, CRM, nuances between the two, pros and cons, benefits, things to know. We covered a lot of ground in the episode, so really appreciate your time.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, hopefully you guys found this useful. I appreciate it. It's a lot of fun for me. So, yeah.
Absolutely. For our listeners, please do not forget to subscribe to the CRM Success Show for more episodes featuring leaders like Dave, who are shaping the CRM and ERP space in this case. And you can follow us for more exclusive content on LinkedIn and YouTube for the future.